with me, CJ Quarterbaum. Tell Me More is a place for people who are curious and interested about life and they want to know more and learn more and hopefully change their futures. And with that, we're talking about the future today. I'm joined by a good friend of mine, Johnny Chang. Johnny, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So Johnny is going to talk to us about all things health and fitness today. And I'm really excited about this conversation because if you know me outside of here, most of my free time is spent thinking, reading, writing, doing these things. Johnny, tell the people about yourself. Who are you? Where are you from? And what do you do now?
Okay. So I guess I am a healthcare fitness provider, I guess on the holistic side. And I guess I'm based in New York, been here my whole life. And yeah, went to school for physical therapy, acupuncture, and did other trainings relevant over the years. And I guess that is what I focus on nowadays, really bridging the gap from an Eastern and Western perspective and really just focused on maximizing being most effective for the individual in terms of how we're addressing their current state of health, whether it be dealing with disease or injury, or they're trying to optimize where they're currently at.
That's good. I want to start with this bridging of the Eastern and Western medicines. This is becoming more popular, and you've been thinking about this for a long time. So could you just speak a little bit about the differences between Eastern and Western medicine and how you like to bridge the gaps between the two?
Right. Okay. So yeah, I guess one of the biggest things that you're starting to see is the different techniques and ways of looking at how the body is assessed. So I guess from a Western perspective, you tend to see a lot of things very direct, very concrete for the most part. And where they don't see something direct or concrete, they'll mention a lot of times, oh, we don't know the etiology or where it comes from or how it's starting, etc. Whereas in Eastern medicine or Eastern approaches, you're really looking at a connection from what you see on the surface, like symptom wise, or what the person's actually describing as their problem, and then you're connecting it to okay, what are all the dominoes in place that lead from the start to the end. So a lot of times, I guess you're going to be focused on, from an Eastern perspective, you will be focused on what they call as the root cause or the fundamental thing that really stems everything else, let's say. And I guess on the Western side, a lot of times you'll see them really be targeted towards the symptoms in general, I would say. Like, I guess, as an aside, or taking a little step back, looking at the whole picture nowadays, you're starting to see more and more guys come up, or providers, professionals come up and start speaking on, okay, well, your symptom is X, Y, and Z. However, that it may not be ending there. So they're starting to give a hint onto the fact that there's a little more than what we're seeing at hand.
Yeah, this idea of like getting to the root cause it's really important for me. I come from a family that has a long history of just different medical ailments, and I've had my own in recent years. I think like turning 30, just all these random things started popping up, and it felt like the healthier I was getting, maybe from like a nutrition and fitness standpoint, it was starting to produce some other things. So like I've had some skin issues for a while. Like you probably can't see it on my hands, but I will if my gut's not in balance and I'm having too much gluten, I'll end up with this like dermatitis on my hands. And I remember going to a dermatologist one time, and it was I was like really peaking my health and fitness journey. I had like 1,000-day streak on my Fitness Pal. I logged everything that I ate. And so I walk in and I'm like, hey, this is what I'm experiencing. I think it might have something to do with what I'm eating. And I can tell you everything I've eaten for the last 6 months. And she looks at me, she goes, oh, that has nothing to do with it. Just take this steroid cream. And I'm like, I know I didn't go to school for this, but I don't think that's true. I think there is some connection here. And as I've done more learning and research, I found that there is a connection between our skin
Exactly.
health and the gut imbalance. And so I feel that is where Eastern medicine is so beneficial to us in getting to that root cause and saying, hey, your hip hurts, but there's probably some malfunction in your ankle that's shooting all the way up.
Right. So, like, sort of speak on that a little more. Like even if it is a physical injury, like musculoskeletal, dealing with muscles and joints, etc., that sometimes can just simply be derived from the gut as well, due to the fact that the gut is sort of the gateway that minimizes or allows inflammation to really occur in the body from a entire body perspective. So a systemic, I guess, description, let's say. But then,
So your hip pain can be linked to gut health?
yeah, yeah,
Man,
you'd be
I can't
surprised.
keep up, man.
So like I guess one example, like recently for me, for example, like I had wrist discomfort that it's like that sort of just came out of the blue, and I certainly did not sprain it. I'm doing my regular workouts, and all of a sudden I'm starting to feel this weird discomfort, and then as it progresses over a week or two, it's just a 8, 9 out of 10 discomfort, even in like holding a push-up position, to the point where I'm like, I can't do that right now, or it just irritates even more if I do that. So I guess a lot of people with autoimmune rheumatoid arthritic symptoms tend to describe something like that. So my point being is that I'm realizing that I'm eating outside my diet, especially with the holidays and so on. It's a lot more than usual, and now my body's reacting with inflammation in certain, and genetically, I guess I might be predisposed to certain areas in the body that might catch the inflammation a little more. So you end up getting the inflammation in that area due to whatever gut irritability symptoms, and then musculoskeletal wise, like certain joint or muscle regions will start to bother more so because of natural patterns of inflammation, let's say. But then, yeah, you did mention that ankle being the root cause of possible hip pain. That's a straightforward, I guess, regional interdependence concept, where how one area of the body will affect another. Um, yeah,
Cool. Johnny, so like we're the same age. We're
yeah,
pushing
same here.
40. Can you talk a
You
little
don't have
bit?
to use the word 40.
Listen, it's where we are. We accept it. We may not like it, but this is where we are.
Right.
And a lot of people who listen to this podcast are around our age, maybe a bit older than us. Can you talk a little bit about how our bodies change as we age? I know a lot of people who, like myself, will say, man, I was really healthy. I was fine all this time. And now all of a sudden in my 30s, 40s, 50s, these new things are popping up that just haven't been an issue before.
Right. So first and foremost thing that comes to mind when you mentioned our age range is and changes is actually there's a clarification that they're finding in the science on. And we're talking about metabolism here, your energy output, like throughout the age life cycle, let's say. So when you're born to beyond retirement, and they're finding that between the ages of 20 years old to 60 years old, your metabolism, your energy expenditure is flat, is the same. So weight gain is not a result of decreased metabolism or decreased energy expenditure, because it's just incredibly clear that your metabolism, your calorie needs are the same, not accounting for exercise and etc. Your just baseline energy needs are the same between the ages of 20 to 60. So why is it really common for people to have weight gain or all these ailments and not feeling energetic, not feeling as if they're thriving, etc., as they hit their late 20s or early 30s and onwards, or whatever it is that they're, whatever time frame they are starting to describe these scenarios for themselves. And a lot of it has to do with I would describe it as thresholds being met in terms of irritability in the body. And to be really blunt or very focused, and I guess we sort of set the stage for that earlier in the conversation, was speaking on the gut health status, microbiome, relevant issues here. And you realize that in particular is what sort of shifts. And they're starting to see that in the literature, where, like, let's say, depending on where you're living, what you're doing, the stresses that you're going through, your microbiome, the coexisting organisms that live in your digestive tract, and that extends to throughout the rest of your body, without going into detail for now, that can go through a shift. So even as simple as taking one round of antibiotics can make permanent changes to your gut microbiome, which
Wow.
affect everything. Like, the gut microbiome is a continuation, or continues not only through the digestive tract, but also through your skin, your eyes, your ears, nose, etc. And you realize that becomes a huge factor in terms of how the body works. So even energy production, you have, I guess, butyrate producing bacteria in your gut that feeds the gut cells, and that in turn affects its status of closure. So if it is well sealed, well closed, not inflamed, and it recovers well, you minimize inflammation that way. But on the contrary, if you're irritating the gut through foods that don't do well for your body, through environmental factors that could be considered pollutants, toxins, to even negative stressors in particular. Positive stressors actually help the gut heal to heal and become more resilient. And again, positive stressors physically being exercise, I guess good social interaction that I would point out being positive on the system and how that is a positive effect on how you function overall. But jumping back into the negative stress, you realize that the negative stress ends up causing damage to the gut status. So that in turn leads to the allowance of inflammation running through the rest of the body. So anyways, going on to these shifts in the microbiome over the years, they're noticing that there is this pattern because of these variables that you're noticing, these factors that you're noticing that changes with the human. Yeah, so that's just a really rough overview, let's say.
So it sounds like the microbiome is the key to our health long term.
Most definitely, most definitely.
So then because I think for the average person, they don't know what that means. They don't know how to feed the microbiome, what's good, what's not good. What would you give people as like a basic primer? Hey, this is because there is what's it called, biological diversity in terms of what we all need from a dietary standpoint. But are there some kind of baseline metrics that you could give people, or baseline best practices to say this is good for everybody in terms of feeding your microbiome?
Right. So in general, I guess it really comes down to a design perspective. So you realize that our digestive system's set up differently from that of an animal that only eats plants. So I guess we could start on that avenue, how our setup is we only have a single stomach versus a cow that has multiple stomachs. And so hence, if we try to eat grass, it's not going to work well, let alone we actually have a degree of, I guess we receive a degree of actually toxicity from plant substances, whereas the cow is able to fully process plants. So without going any further on that avenue, you realize that when you eat what your body is meant to take in and process, you minimize irritability or you maximize your ability to absorb those nutrients anyway, or make use of the source of nutrition. So with that said, you realize that humans' digestive tract sort of relates a little more towards a carnivore side. So starting from an animal-based perspective or a little bit more carnivore, if you wanted to do a really strong reset, you would just really focus on clean meats, clean fishes, other animal products like eggs, etc. To start off, you may do that at least about a week's time, mainly because you realize the gut lining takes about 3 to 5 days to regenerate itself, or that's the life cycle of each cell. So giving that time frame with foods that don't irritate your digestive tract is the start of allowing inflammation to just lower, to reset itself, or allow the gut environment to reset itself. And anytime you're consuming something or you don't consume something, you're allowing the microbiome to start to adjust. So hence, something as simple as fasting, a minimum of 18 hours starts to allow that adjustment to happen. So you naturally lower in inflammation because you're not provoking a negative response if you were eating things that didn't do well for you in the first place. And then, so now you're able to target foods that do better for you. So animal-based foods in particular, you start reintroducing other substances, other plant substances to an extent, because there is a degree of this omnivore image for the human, obviously. So you're starting with plant substances that are more likely for the human to do well with. So that tends to be fruits, because I guess when you're looking from a design perspective on the plant itself, fruits tend to be less toxic, or they have components that are meant to be eaten by other organisms. Whereas other plant components like the roots, stems, seeds, etc., are actually definitely heavily protected because it's not meant to eat. It's the support for the plant itself. But yeah, so without going into too much detail on that end, I guess the simple recommendation would be starting from an animal-based diet or leaning a little more towards carnivore for at least a week. And then you start including fruits. And then maybe when you realize your body's a lot more steady, stable, etc. And this may take a month, 3 months, and depending on where you are in your journey, like some people with autoimmune chronic conditions, where they've been run down for years on end, it may take years to actually do reversal or even be able to get ground on, okay, how does their body work? Because there are just a lot more variables and such at that point. So yeah, simple recommendation, you start with clean animal products, work your way into some fruits that work well for you, and then possibly some plant substances at the end. I'm bringing in the plants at the end is because you get this concept of how plants are helpful medicinally, especially there's no argument that there are these medicinal aspects of plants, which are the chemicals that plants naturally have that your body is responding to. So in the right amounts, it becomes really helpful. And again, you have the caveat here is that certain people will react more strongly than others because each person's microbiome, the organisms that reside in them, differ. So with these differences from individual to individual, you end up seeing that, okay, like maybe these set of plants, or I guess if we're being really specific, herbs are not as ideal. So you would find a different approach to help them target their goals at that point, whether it be through disease, injury, or optimizing the body, mind, etc. Yeah.
What do you said this a few times, meats and clean meats and fishes. What are you defining as a clean meat and a clean fish?
A lot of it has to do with how it's raised and what it's eating. So when I guess the biggest thing on media nowadays has to do with grass-fed meat. So when you're talking about animals or livestock rather that only eat grass or only eat plants, you don't want to be introducing other products in their diet that are laden with, I guess, contaminants. So you're talking about like grain-fed versus grass-fed, and I guess we'll be really specific to cows or specifically to beef at this point. And you realize that grass-fed, if they're fully grass-fed, 100% grass-fed, you're not introducing unnatural sources of food. In, I guess, in nature, or however you want to call it, from what I understand, cows aren't necessarily eating grain, corn related type products. So now, like in commercial farming, from what I've heard, you have the purpose of grain feeding towards the end of the lifespan, especially of these livestock, for the sake of gaining weight, increasing the weight of the cows, so that it's a higher purchase price. It's a
And for that fattier finish on the end, because
right. That's
grass-fed
true.
beef is leaner.
Yeah, in general, right. So you realize that why is it that they're able to gain weight more easily on grain versus just simply grass? And you get the impression that it has something to do with how their body's processing it, or how it may not be ideal at that point, and how there may be a degree of inflammation. Because I guess grain fed, you tend to have the issue with pesticide contamination, etc. So yeah, so when contaminants are in the animal's diet, it also does store in the animal, and specifically it tends to be in the fat. So you realize that when you're eating meats that or beef that's not as clean, it's going to pass into the one that consumes it, so the human in this case. So like when you're really on a reset, and especially if your body's more sensitive, especially if you are in the case where you have a chronic condition, autoimmune case, etc., your body's more run down and not as resilient. So these variables that you're consuming affect you more notably. So that's where I'm really pushing, if you're really going to go for a reset where you want a clean slate again, you want to minimize the variables in play. So hence, clean meats, make sure the meats are fully grass fed, they're eating what they're supposed to eat, so that they become a source of nutrition for yourself, for other people, in the way that's ideal, without contaminants, without toxin related exposure, and so on. So now you have this issue with heavy metals in fish. Nowadays, unfortunately, I guess that has a lot to do with how humans have interacted with the environment, etc. From what I understand, you can't really get away from that. So your best bet is to find out, okay, which sources of fish tend to be most uncontaminated, and especially if it's a canned product, meaning like not, and this is apart from simply the ingredients that they're adding, but just simply like yeah, like the size of the fish, the contamination, etc. So you would need some third party testing, like in general, or you look at that data to figure that out. So I guess off the top of my head, the reason why I eat the brand Seasons sardines is because it has the lowest amount of contamination with heavy metals in particular. So now, if you're talking about nutrient density, and the other thing about sardines is that they are a smaller fish. They naturally will accumulate less heavy metal exposure or toxins. So now you have the other, I guess, avenue of farmed versus wild caught. And again, it has to do with the practice, well, specifically the farming practices. So usually it's not the greatest environment when it's farmed, mainly because there's not as much space. The feed that they are using, or actually the it has to do with like how they're trying to minimize disease in the fish that's being raised. So they'll use antibiotics at times and so on. And it's, from what I understand, it's not a clean environment whatsoever, and it definitely does not mimic a natural environment either. So, and then you also have this other aspect of it where, like, let's say like the amount of light that they can get, for example, for salmon in particular, so the amount of light affects the vitamin D amount in their system. Yeah, and so that you realize so long story short, you realize the environment affects the nutrients that they're able to develop in their bodies, because the environment is a stimuli or stimulus onto how they develop. So hence, wild caught will give you a fuller spectrum of what you're wanting to consume or wanting to really absorb in your system, because the nutrient benefits are just so much greater.
Interesting. So I think about the animal based diet a lot because it is probably 80 to 85% of what I do. Every couple of weeks or months, I'm like, I need this thing and I gotta go have it. But you were the one who introduced me to it. Last year, I was having another one of those dyshydratic eczematic outbreaks, and I think we got lunch or something, and we went to a Korean barbecue spot, and you were
Yeah.
like, "Hey, I'm just having meat, no vegetables, don't put any oil. I'm gonna use the beef tallow." And I'm like, "Yo, what is this?" And so then you start talking to me about the animal based diet, and if I could like boil it down, it's mostly beef, fruit, raw dairy. And within 3 weeks of doing that, I found that brain fog was gone, my sleep was better, my skin was clearer, I didn't need as much coffee. And it was really kind of just this incredible on the ground experiment. But there were two issues I kept running into. One is it's how restrictive it is. And I think like bread is just delicious. And I have an insatiable sweet tooth that, it makes it hard for me to go more than I'm getting better. Like I'm starting to string together longer periods of being animal based before I need
Yeah.
that sweet break. But then also when I try to tell other people about this, specifically like other black and brown people, Asian friends, who we all come from these cultures where our food is so flavorful and it's so delicious and our cuisines are phenomenal. Like especially black people, they're like, listen, just salt, that's it. I can't add, all this other stuff. So how would you talk to the skeptic about, trying to incorporate this in while in some ways trying to remain faithful to their heritage and what they grew up. Like, I love curry chicken. I need curry chicken in my life. Like, as a proud Trini American, I can't see a world in which that goes away.
Yeah, so part of the picture, or when you're looking at the journey for the individual going through this reset, is that they will hit a point where when they're more healed or more resilient, more developed digestive wise, they would be able to handle to a reasonably well, I guess, descriptor of these different foods. Specifics really come down to food sensitivities or things that cause small amounts of inflammation. Not quite an allergy yet, where it's full blown, but enough to not be optimal. And then again, not be optimal has various, I guess, intensities. I'd say various levels. So early on in the journey, to be strict would be the only easiest way, mainly because then you're just allowing the body to not be agitated. You're not provoking the body in any way when you're eating things really simply, things that are unlikely to cause any symptoms, whatnot. So now, as you go along the process, you're expecting to reintroduce. So I guess this is the concept of elimination diet, and then reintroducing when the body's at a better, I guess, status. So convincing them I think the largest hurdle is right in the initial step of realizing, like, what are we weighing here? Their current satisfaction with different foods, or really they're going to conquer their lack of energy and allow a reset, allow a redefinition of who they function as to really happen. So you're really weighing the fundamentals there. It's either you allow your health to really make substantial progress, or you could stay where you are. But yeah, it really comes down to the individual, like, what do they want more? And are they willing to make initial sacrifices, if anything? So, but then, yeah, it's also to give them the hope, or to the understanding that this is not indefinite. Mainly because if, let's say, in our earlier years, typically before we've accumulated enough digestive damage, like when we're in our what's it called, adolescent ages, etc., before we handle X amount of stress, our bodies are more resilient then. And you realize that resilience, it is attainable, or you may not be able to be at the same level of resilience, but there is a degree of it that can go forward, even if you're dealing with disease and you're not as great as you once were. It's to allow people to realize that healing does happen, but it may not be as clear cut as most people would like to see it, just simply because of the various amount of variables or factors in play, from stress to actual foods entering the system and causing havoc, or toxin exposure, accumulation of things that the body shouldn't have. So you realize when you start to when the body starts to show these symptoms of something's going wrong, to reset it, you would need to remove the things that's provoking the body, the things that are agitating the body. So you allow the body to really come back down to baseline, and from baseline, then you work up again. So when you're working up, you may be introducing whatever spices and things that are in mixes that these different cultures would use. It's the key thing is to realize, well, which component of the mix is really irritating you, and you I guess, to be optimal moving forward, and not to really regress too much, you would ideally keep that out completely.
And I think it's a lesson for all of life. It is the short-term sacrifice for the long-term gain. And that, as we start to round this out to a close, makes me think about the future. We're 25 years from now. That's kind of the big projection that I like to use on this podcast, because the life in 2050 is going to look a lot different than it does today. And one of those, when we look from a health perspective, some of those I would say are, I want to say it's 75% of people in America are going to be overweight or obese. 66% will be type 2 diabetic. At present, so this isn't even the future, at present, we get something like the average adult gets almost 2/3 of their food from highly processed foods. The average teenager gets 75% of their food from highly processed foods. And so when we see what we have today and we see what the projections are for 25 years from now, there's kind of a direct link to what the health outcomes are going to be. So, as we close this out, Johnny, I want to ask you, what are 3 pieces of advice you would give someone who says, hey, I don't want to wake up 25 years from now and have these drastic health outcomes? So, what are 3 things that I can do starting today in order to ensure some level of longevity? You heard it here. Eat well, move well, sleep well. Johnny, where can the people find you if they wanted to get in contact with you, if they, because you do PT, right? And some coaching services? Perfect. Hit him up. This man has taught me so much in the year or so that I've known him. I'm going to have you back on the pod because there are some cool things you're working on that I would love to discuss. Would love to talk more about movement in another episode. So definitely going to have you back probably very soon. So please, thank you again for joining us on another episode of Tell Me More. Remember the big takeaways. Eat well, move well, sleep well. And join us next time as I ask you to tell me more.